All right. So welcome to, I believe we are now on session 17 of the Stafford Beer Brain the Firm reading group with General Intellect Unit. Today we are finishing off chapter, what chapter are we going now?
12.
Chapter 12, and we are going to look at the final section, Notes on the Operation of System 3, starting on page 175. Okay, so I'll just read some of the intro text here, and then we'll have a bit of conversation. Here is the highest level of autonomic management and the lowest level of corporate management. Its function is primarily to govern the stability of the internal environment of the organization. The neurophysiological model of the process was advanced in Chapter 8, and its managerial analog was discussed in Chapter 9. There are three kinds of information system converging on System 3. The first belongs to the vertical command axis. System 3 is part of corporate management, and therefore a transmitter of policy and special instructions to the divisions. It is also a receiver of information about the internal environment, which it handles in three ways. One, as a metasystemic controller downwards. Two, as the most senior filter of somatic news upwards. And three, as an algodonote. Secondly, System 3 is the only recipient of information filtered upward from System 2. The mechanics of this process has just been discussed. Thirdly, System 3 handles the parasympathetic information circuits, which are antithetic to those of the sympathetic or System 2 circuits. All right, so anything to discuss here? There's quite a lot of information packed into that paragraph. Jake H., please go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I just got a question, about what that last sentence there, that it handles the parasympathetic information circuits, which are antithetic to those of the sympathetic. So it's like the effect of what the System 2 circuits do. Is this like the dampening effect of the excitatory effect of System 2, like overcoming the threshold needed to push information to System 3?
It's what we saw in section 2 of the book when it was talking about how the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems interact with each other. So yeah, an excitatory action in the parasympathetic system can actually dampen the sympathetic system, which would here be System 2. Shane, please go ahead.
One thing that just popped into my head is maybe that System 2 is helping the subunits to kind of maximize their production, right? Like there's a certain maximalism that the information integration is aiming towards. You want all these performance indices to go up and up and up, whereas that's fine. That is usually probably desirable, except System 3 could intervene and say cool it. Knock it off with the oxygen. We don't want too much of that stuff. That stuff's crazy, So it's probably it's acting as a dampener to the perhaps overperformance of some organ.
Yeah, I mean, you could see say System 4 says, look, we're changing product lines. We need to furlough a bunch of production. That could dampen production under the control of System 2. We could also see everyone needs to take a vacation. That could be a kind of foresight kind of thing. That's handled by System 4, passing it on to System 3. Okay, so Matt, go ahead.
I think an example could also be a central bank fussing with interest rates. Like the business cycle is kind of this too. You have periods of expansion where a lot of stuff is a lot of deals are being made and a lot of ventures are being made, and then you have periods of contraction where you start to see which of the ones were the ones that were kind of unsound those are going to go out of business. So, I think there's a lot. I was just reading some more People's Republic of Walmart. They're talking about the role of central banks in like regulating this kind of stuff. So, I see the System 3 stuff going on there.
Yeah, definitely. Like raising the interest rate to reduce lending can be a way to adjust for an overheated economy. Assuming we're not, assuming you're not in a very, very strange state of capitalism like we are in now, where it's like, yeah, you can hit that brake, but as soon as you do, the whole thing's going to go into panic. So it's pretty much effectively like not on the table. Okay, so let's continue on then. I did want to just briefly mention in the previous paragraph, so the vertical command axis transmits instructions downwards to System 1's through System 3 on the vertical command axis. Yeah. Again, there's that function it does of filtering upwards, which I have a little bit of hard time distinguishing from its role as an algorithm node. Because its filtering is kind of, like, the way it does the filtering is kind of through that algorithm node, right? Like, it's like, oh yeah, there's like a certain level of information coming in from System 2, but it's not important enough to send up to System 4, and then eventually it hits a threshold and it fires, right? So those seem to kind of be similar sorts of functions that are going on there. Shane, can you go ahead?
I wonder when he mentions OO and lastly as an algorithm node, I think he's emphasizing that like an algorithm node is often like a filter that is conditioned by pain and pleasure signals. So there's the filtering. It needs to readjust its own filtering in accordance with these sort of like adaptive triggers. Right.
I guess in the sense that it receives information from many different areas. Mm-hmm. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's also that like I think he uses filtering like if I remember right, like sort of like kind of like a reduce too, because like when it actually talks to the system that's above it, like it's translating it into System 4's meta language. Like it's aggregating all these data sources from all these different places, but like it doesn't just do that as an info dump on System 4. Like it prepares like a little one-page report, or it's a dashboard that just has like a very very highly summarized table and graph.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a report there is a report prepared. It is sent on to President Trump, and then he doesn't read it. Shane, go ahead.
There's a term in math, and it especially pops up in functional programming languages like Haskell and stuff, and the term is fold. A fold is a function that you can use to then implement things like filters. I think a lot of stuff like filters, summing, and a bunch of other sort of things can all be implemented in terms of a fold. A fold is a very fundamental kind of operation on information. And I kind of like to use that term in my own head, right, for a lot of the stuff that Stafford is referring to. It's folding information. And some of that might be like what we would classically think of as a filter, where it's like, take the red cards and throw the black cards away. That would be filtering. But like compressing information or summing it up and like parceling it into little buckets and stuff would be a fold-like kind of operation that wouldn't exactly correspond to what we call filtering.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Cool. Okay, I think that helps clarify that section. So the first task now is to examine this third informational component more carefully, and this is done in the recollection of earlier explanations. The key to an understanding of the parasympathetic component of the model, the left-hand chain of Figure 27, is the limitation of the sympathetic, or System 2 component. All along, we have insisted on the ongoing nature of routine control. We do not suppose that a firm is virgin territory, over which we may trample, making plans ready for the day when something will happen. The firm is happening now. The firm's activities are well understood. Its regulators at System 1 and System 2 are regulators, i.e., they are error-controlled feedback servos. It follows that there are models of standard behavior enshrined in the control mechanisms we have so far discussed. They are the paradigms against which error is measured. From the viewpoint of corporate management, however, and in this case of System 3, such paradigms assume too much. They take no account of the external environment of the organism as a whole, only of the external environment of their own divisions. They may be regulators of a local homeostasis, then, but System 3 is the only competent regulator of organic homeostasis, since it alone has a System 4 input. What we have so far, Systems 1 and 2, created, it follows, is a way of handling divisional control and a way of handling interdivisional interaction on the assumption that the divisions between them know all there is to know about the adaptation and growth of the total organism. This they do not. In fact, it is easy enough to propose examples of total behavior which, because they are novel, heuristic, evolutionary, cannot be adequately represented within System 2 with its paradigmatic models, although they may be communicated to System 1 by the direct somatic system. Divisional directorates will understand these latter messages, of course, because they are themselves masters of the company's operations. The trouble is that their local regulatory centers are not organized to handle what is not routine. In particular, they are not organized to represent, to attend to measure, to transduce, other than what locally happens. This is a problem of requisite variety. Okay, so this is the, should I get to the answer? I guess I should read the answer, and then we'll talk about the whole thing. The answer, learned from the autonomic nervous system, is a direct parasympathetic access to the divisional operations themselves. There, under the local supervision of the divisional directorate, antithetical modes of control may be established. These are antithetical precisely in the sense that they handle aspects of affairs not handled via System 2. Remember, the cholinergic and adrenergic chemistries of the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems. The distinction between them is not absolute, any more than our diagrams are absolutely correct in dividing the autonomic system as a whole into quite separate parts. But the main architecture and chemistry is clear and useful. Okay, so let's talk about this section here where we see the sort of parasympathetic role. Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, I love this emphasis on separating the routine from the sort of exceptional stuff, right? That like we have these stacked regulators, and there's like adequate regulation up and down the stack. But at each layer, there's a new sort of emergence where, okay, everything below this layer is taken care of. It's fairly routine stuff. But where does the novelty come from? And where does the handling of novelty come from? Well, it comes from the next layer up. I mean, the next layer is helping the lower layers to deal with novelty. I guess it's sort of, I don't know, like in the history of philosophy with this sort of stuff with like Hume, with like mental habit, right? That like we become acclimated to routine things. And then there's the sort of like stuff that's exceptional that forces you to think and to reintegrate new information. And then that settles down into a habit, right? And then there's some other traumatic thought experience that like scrambles the circuit momentarily, and then it settles back into routine. And if everything's going routinely, well, fucking great. Habits are going to be wonderful. But when a 300-foot tiger appears from out of nowhere, you're going to have to start thinking pretty fast, you know?
Right. I like how he divides here the sort of parasympathetic role as novel, heuristic, and evolutionary versus the sympathetic role, which is paradigmatic. Right, so it's operating in a confined paradigm and optimizing within that paradigm, but it doesn't have these heuristic, novel, evolutionary functions. Okay, Jake H., go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think that does kind of clear up sort of the question that I had before, or at least a little bit, I guess. But just sort of that idea of that system 2 and sort of system 1 by output, but system 2 handles these kind of regular things like you were just saying, Shane, of it's like this is the regular function. It should be communicating, like, because it's part of the functioning of system 1 or the system 1s. They need to communicate with system 2 to make sure that the output is regulated and all that stuff we discussed last time. But then when there's a problem, it sort of communicates in this other language of, and he talks about in this last paragraph that you read of the distinction of the cholinergic and adrenergic chemistries of the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems, of like that they're communicating in kind of different languages, but also there's like the potential for kind of some crosstalk, and like each language could have a different impact on the same system, so that they kind of have like when system 2 encounters some novel or weird behavior or something that shouldn't happen, it knows what to do with that, which is to send it up to system 3. And it doesn't have to worry about trying to solve that within system 2 because it doesn't have the full context, like it says. And I think that's something.
Okay, Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, that stuff's really good. I think we can also call back to the earlier part of this chapter with System 1, where System 1 has its own, the little plug between the systems has its own little planning function, right? Like System 1 has its own routine plans, or each subdivision has its routine plans. System 2 is assisting in the carrying out of those routine plans, and it's up to System 3 to watch out for the novel situations and tell them to adjust. And then there's this like dialectical sort of thing going on where the novelty will eventually sink in as routine. And like that's the cycle of adaptation, right? Like you're learning to treat things as unremarkable routine sort of activities, and then also learning how to integrate brand new stuff into the circuit so that next week it feels like it's routine, and so on and so on.
Okay, so here we have figure 32, which details essentially the interaction between System 3, System 1, and then on the sides we have, on the right side we have the sympathetic system, which is System 2, and then on the left side we have the parasympathetic, which is going to be connections coming from 3 down to the System 1s through this audit ganglion. Which I guess is it. Is that's System 3-star? Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. All right. So looking at figure 33, excuse me. Looking at figure 32, we see how System 3 is intended to work. Routine information about internal regulation is always available from the Corporate Regulatory Center, the CRC, which is located on the right-hand side in System 2. All right. Point S constantly receives filtered news from the CRC. Point Q may request any further data generated by System 2. So point Q is connected to S, and it's on the line downwards from System 4. The complex QS is filtering information down to the divisional directorates, while the complex RP is filtering information up to the senior management. The entire complex, PQRS, is the machinery for controlling internal homeostasis. Point P is enabled to interrogate divisional operations themselves, which respond to inquiries at point R. So point P, yes. Point P is enabled to interrogate divisional operations themselves, which respond to inquiries at point R. So it looks a little bit backwards because the arrows are going the other direction, right? Because like P's at the top of this line and then R is at the bottom. But it's basically like the request comes from P to R, and then it queries what's going on in the System 1s and then sends it up, I think is what Beer's trying to say here. All of this is a corporate management structure, which constitutes the operations directorate of the firm. Since the RP complex is intended to report upwards, its right to information should be carefully noted, and the role of its direct access, parasympathetic channels, must be properly understood. Remember, somatic information ascending the main vertical axis will be divisional information, coalesced to be called corporate information, for no better reason than that all the divisional operations taken together apparently exhaust the corporation's operations. Again, apparently is the important point there, I think. The information ascending through the corporate regulatory center is already more than this. It is genuinely about the synergy of the divisions. However, its limitation is its stereotype nature. The structure of its mechanisms is paradigmatic. With the third type of reporting, both problems are overcome. Point P is instigating a kind of internal audit, though not simply financial, nor even necessarily office-based. This is a corporate activity, having short-term synergistic objectives. The Systems 1 have not, which are paradigm-free, and System 2 is not. So, essentially saying, yeah, there's information coming from all the System 1s up that PR line right there, and you might think that that is corporate information. But just because it is the sum of, or it is the set of all the System 1s, does not mean it's properly corporate activity, because each of the System 1s are interpreting the world in a paradigmatic sense. And when point P goes through what we call System 3 star, right, through the AG, the audit ganglion, it is interrogating the System 1s with the corporation in mind. It is not interrogating them on a divisional or paradigmatic basis. And because this System 3 star activity is exceptional auditing, it's also not routine. Right? It's kind of like, no, there's something important that we need to know here, as opposed to like, oh, okay, just checking in, how are things going, that kind of question. So let's talk a little bit more about this. Shane, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's at this level that we get the emergence of something that's more than the sum of the System 1 operations. This is where the body proper of the corporation, as like a whole entity that's more than the sum of its parts, starts to come into being. And it is because this audit capability that the System 3 has in this PQRS crossroads. It has a model of what's supposed to be going on. It has a kind of what do we call it in like proprioception. It is a sense of itself. It is a sense of its own body. And it's then constantly integrating information about the actual performance of the organs, comparing it against its own model, and then querying back for stuff. So, I mean, it might, I guess, is everyone on the same page with this sort of stuff? It might be useful to work through an example of what I think the information flow might look like. So, I think it would be that, you know, the System 3 here, the PQRS thing, maybe notice it passes some information up to System 4, then System 4 relays. That will go up along the RP line. System 4 sends down some adjustments through the QS line, and System 3 integrates the new model and relays them downwards to the subdivisions. Then it's listening on the S point to System 2, and it you know, a couple of ticks go by and it's like, okay, this is all fine. This seems to be going as planned. And then it's like, wait. It uses the Q point to query System 2. And it's like, are you sure about that? Or, you know, give me the last 3 samples and integrate them. And then it goes, fuck, and goes to the P point and sends down some audit stuff. Like, hey, divisions B and D, are you sure you know what you're doing? The responses come up through R. And at every point along the way in this example, the information is being integrated with the model the System 3 has of itself. And at that point, when it gets back its audit, it could then figure out what's gone wrong and issue the corrective instructions downwards and issue the report upwards. And so it's a crossroads. It's a four directional loop that's crossing over at this point.
Yes, Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, the first time I read this, I found this whole PQRS thing horribly confusing. And it took me a lot of just pencil and paper and thinking about it to get a sense of it. And I think one of the things that makes it tricky is that each of the points, PQRS, is performing a dual role. On the one hand, it's either communicating up or down, and at the same time, it's either communicating to the left or to the right. It is doing both, and so in regarding each of those points, you have to take into account its dual role, and its dual role is deliberate. Each does two things and is defined by doing two things. And Stafford meant that deliberately. It's not an accident. And therefore, to really understand it, you have to see why each one gets the two roles it has and why those two roles make sense to be linked together. So I don't know if that makes sense, but and also to understand that there's a fifth role for System 3, which is the arousal filter, which is independent. Like, the PR mechanism is not doing arousal here. It's just having a conversation back and forth as part of the 3-4 homeostat, not arousing to try and wake up System 5.
Right. That's a very good point. There's a whole other role there. Okay, so let's go to... I believe the next paragraph is in the diagram. Is that right? In the diagram, the acquisition of information in this form is seen as mediated through special ganglia, centers which do not merely transmit information, but process it too. Thus, each division has its own audit ganglion, reporting to the operations directorate, and dealing wholly with the corporate synergy. These ganglia will be brought into action solely for this synergistic purpose. And because every other kind of reporting upward must always fail to comprehend the information needs of System 3, which arise beyond the pre-arranged routines of Systems 1 and 2. So again, it's kind of an exceptional system, or it is an exceptional system, and it's a corporate system, and it's different from Systems 1 and 2. This book deals nowhere with the established techniques of scientific management in any detail. Good to get that out of the way. Page 178, just in case you were wondering. But we should observe in passing how most of them will be applied by a competent System 3. The PQRS complex is ideally placed to use every kind of optimizing tool in its direction of current operations, from inventory theory to mathematical programming. A dynamic current model of the firm's internal working must in fact emerge at this level, and offers the ideal management tool for the control of internal stability. The final point to note about System 3 is the existence of the arousal filter, which models the reticular formation of the brainstem. The collateral fibers feeding the algedonic system are clearly shown in Figure 32, and the purpose of this system has been dealt with at some length already. We shall return to it when we reach the algeda node in System 5. So we see the fibers in the diagram going up through the arousal filter, the AF, and then that passes onward. But we are not going to talk about that in detail right now. We're going to talk about that when we get to System 5. The arousal job at the third level is in fact the usual filtering job. Statistical criteria must be established to ensure that the ascending algedonic information on the vertical axis of whatever kind is not simply absorbed by the PQRS homeostat in the performance of its own function, for it would then be lost in the upward reports from point P, which, after all, will be about the effective functioning of the homeostat and not about discrete internal events. Those are the ones we seek algodonically to monitor. So this is a separate channel, as Jeremy said. It's a separate channel from PQRS. It's doing something different from the homeostasis maintenance. Shane, go ahead.
This reminds me of the earlier thing, way back in the earlier chapters, with that horrible brass and wood machine thing with its levers and stuff and like the dials that you could turn. And I think the point that Stafford put out there, that even if you sort of jam it all the way so all the lights light up red or whatever it is, you still need this like little bit of play. You need a bit of freedom there to ensure that the dial doesn't get jammed one way or the other. Which is perhaps slightly contrary to our usual thinking on efficiency and stuff like that, right? That like you would hope that the PQRS homeostat would perfectly absorb all of the information in the system, and yet you kind of know that it couldn't possibly, and so you'd better leave this excessive channel open so there's a little bit of outflow. There's a sort of structural incentive to not pursue maximal efficiency, because that would mean crystallization. It would mean you'd be stuck.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a given when you're dealing with an uncertain environment that it's impossible at any stage to completely capture what's going on in a adaptive way. There needs to be room for exception handling. Okay, Jake H., go on.
That's like, I've been thinking about this, like these systems, right, and how to implement them within like an organization that's not, a capitalist firm, and thinking about like which ones should be automated or which parts should be automated versus not. And it really seems that these kind of the steps between the systems could be automated in a sense, or at least relegated to kind of machines in a way. Like there could be input from one end and input from the other end. But like, whereas the sort of systems themselves that actually need to have, like you said, this ability to handle that unknown or that variance needs to be like made up of people that can handle variance, in a way that like machine can't. And I think it also kind of goes back to that, like the fact, or something that this book has kind of hit on a bunch of times, of this sort of the false dichotomy between horizontal and vertical, and like decentralized and centralized, where, and in this case, it'd be like between, perfectly modeling the thing that you're trying to work on versus not modeling at all and leaving all room for just like human ingenuity or whatever. Just sort of this way that he's kind of building both into the system, and I think that's just a very unique way of looking at it. Very interesting when it comes to trying to talk to people about this stuff, because people really want to put things into that one box versus the other box. They don't want to sort of think that there's, or not that they don't want to think, but it's tough for people to sort of conceive, I guess, of this, unless you've thought about it a bunch, of like having the room for these kind of things in a way that is still like laid out, but not like prescribed,
Right. So, unfortunately, we're not going to get the details about this until we cover System 5, like the real nitty-gritty specifics. It does say that there are statistical filters on the arousal filter, statistical criteria. So it is partially automated in that sense, but I'm sure there's like work of interpretation that will be done as well. It's basically like the emergency notification that's going through this channel. Shane, go ahead.
I'm also kind of thinking in like less automated contexts, the ability for people to bypass layers of the hierarchy and just go straight to the top. Because I remember watching like Blackadder. Blackadder goes fourth season of it, where you have Stephen Fry's character, Lord General Melchett, is the general, right? And you have his secretary, Captain Darling, and then Rowan Atkinson's character, Blackadder, pretty routinely just barges into Melchett's office and then Darling comes trailing after, like, oh, sorry, sir, I couldn't keep him out. And some people would wonder, it's like, oh, but they should just have maximal security on the door, so that's impossible. But it's actually kind of essential to the functioning, well, of the plot, but also probably of that military unit, that it's possible for Blackadder to simply barge in, and that, like, Captain Darling shouldn't be able to perfectly filter that information. There shouldn't be perfect continence in this way, right? You kind of do need some ability to just let excess through, so that the emergency arousal filters in this like personal, interpersonal sort of context can happen. In an automated context, you'd have these like statistical filters and stuff. But this reminds me a lot of just barging into the CEO's office or whatever.
Yeah, I think it is important to have the big red button to call for the emergency. And it's, I mean, I assume that I don't want to spend too much time on this because we're going to talk about it in more detail in System 5, and I'll just be speculating about the way it's arranged until we actually get some more details there. So we'll put a pin in that, and we'll move on to the final section of the chapter. Notes on the problems of systemic interfaces. There are evidently 3 interfaces between the 3 systems so far considered. The systemic interaction between Systems 2 and 3 presents no special problem, since each is managerially controlled by the same authority, the Corporate Operations Directorate. But Systems 1 are managerially controlled by chief executives of autonomous divisions, to whom the principle of accountability applies. They accept the policymaking of the corporation, which impinges on their activities down the central command axis. But their reaction to other kinds of interference at the interfaces between their own Systems 1 and the corporate Systems 2 and 3 may be very different. Here, then, is a major snag. It is the hoary old problem of central control written in a new form. Let this much, however, be clear at once. The snag is endemic to large-scale organization. It has not been invented here. All the cybernetic model has done is to identify the precise nature of the snag. It apparently has 2 components. Firstly, there is the 1-2 interface. This has to do with recognizing that there are other autonomous divisions than my own, and that they have rights as well. Especially, these others have the right not to be undermined by me, however pure my own motives are. Secondly, there is the 1-3 interface. This has to do with recognizing that my own autonomous division is part of a corporation, and that it too has rights. Especially, sad as it seems, the corporation has the right to inhibit and, if necessary, to liquidate my autonomous division. The first component is about interdivisional collaboration. The second is about corporate synergy. So interdivisional collaboration is the 1-2 interface, and corporate synergy is the 1-3 interface. The problem will not vanish because of cybernetics. It will not be resolved by shouting. There is a temporary solution: to declare roundly that the divisions are not, after all, autonomous, and that the firm has been wholly centralized. Then, divisional executives who cannot stomach this edict resign, and for a while, the monolithic firm runs on. It does not work. The whole of this book is dedicated to showing it cannot work. So the pendulum swings. The next temporary solution is ready-made: to declare roundly that the firm has been wholly decentralized. Then, those who have been working at the center of the Then those who have been working at the center for synergistic policies see that their work is doomed. They resign, and for a while, the fragmented firm runs on. This does not work either. It cannot work. The pendulum must swing again, or the corporation blows apart in a series of takeovers. There is no solution to this problem independent of common sense. Pathetically enough, collaborative common sense becomes scarcer the higher one goes in an organization, for psychological reasons which are not obscure. Cybernetics identifies this problem and specifies where it lies. Cybernetics illuminates the problem, indicating the solutions towards which nature itself has evolved. Cybernetics provides a language sufficiently rich and perceptive to make it possible to discuss the problem objectively without heat. There are people, whom the gentle reader will not know, who find it much more fun to fight it out across the spurious frontiers of their own ambition. Shane, go ahead.
I love this little bit at the end here. I got a little bit of a whiff of Hegel off of some of this, right? That the recognition that there are others, right? And that there's a promise here of like bringing some stability to that relation, right? That,
oh yeah.
Integrating my autonomy with everyone else's, and also recognizing that the aggregates that we form, because they take on this, because they have this emergent quality, and they have this, the more than the sum of their parts sort of quality, that those are legitimately autonomous systems themselves, right?
Yes.
And yeah, I don't know, that's pretty interesting stuff, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, the most interesting thing here is that Beer is saying the only solution to the problem of centralization versus decentralization, which arises from the 1-2 interface and the 1-3 interface, is common sense. And that the higher you go on in the structure, the less common sense there's going to be. So it kind of suggests like cybernetics offers a language in which expressions of common sense can be clearly articulated, but it cannot really transcend that. It simply allows us, in a sort of very like analytic philosophy way, to state the terms of the conversation as clearly as possible and as rationally as possible without resorting to sort of ad hominem spurious frontiers of our own ambition. Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, when I first read this, like, I kind of had that same reaction that Rudy, you have, like, what does common sense mean, right? Like, who's common sense? Like, what? Because that term is so often, like, misused or just used, to, like, represent all sorts of things. But I think sort of tease out that a little bit from this. I think what he's trying to say, or what he's saying here, is, like, the relations between people, like, the common sense of, like, well, we both do have this common goal, and therefore we need to find some way of working together to solve it, which, like he's saying here, of the, as you get higher up, becomes about people's personal, like, ambitions of just, like, gaining power, or within the company, or all these other things that are tied up, because as it gets abstracted further from, like, the actual work that's being done by the system ones. And so I think, but and so that's kind of my thought of what he means by common sense, of just that, like, the things that, like, if you get the two people in a room together, absent that sort of, like, larger, like, problems of, like, the psychological problems of, like, well, I want to be in control kind of thing. If you were able to, like, get rid of that part and just get the two people who are doing jobs in the same room, then they'd be able to sort it out, or you'd be able to sort it out somehow. That's my thought of it. But I think it's also good to just, like, when people, like, I'm glad that he's kind of admitting that this problem is a problem that you're going to see in all large firms, in any organization of sufficient size and scope. And there's no way around it. This isn't like a magic bullet. It's just, like, as something that really appealed to me about cybernetics when I first encountered it, and this book when I first started reading it, of just, like, these problems are never going to go. These problems are not something that can be just ignored, and they're not going to go away by having the right thing. It's just a matter of bringing them into concreteness and bringing them into view, so that they can be actually tackled by people who aren't like already advantaged enough to be able to see the whole thing, or have the social capital or whatever to be able to, like, enact their will. And so it's just a matter of, like, well, once we actually reveal the relations within society or within an organization, then that's when we can actually start to tackle them. in whatever way that comes out. And, he's not trying to prescribe a way to do that, but just here's how to reveal these things.
Right. And I do, just before we move on to Matt and Rudy, I do want to just mention, like, what Beer is saying here kind of has its basis in Aristotelian philosophy, right? Like, when we think about Aristotle's virtue ethics, one of the things that he appeals to is the idea of phronesis, which is practical wisdom. And being a developed ethical individual means having phronesis. And if you don't have phronesis, if you don't have practical wisdom, you can understand sort of abstract moral dictates and not be able to act on them because circumstances require judgment, right? And so I think what Beer is appealing to here is like, yeah, we're giving you a framework, but ultimately, an organization without without individuals who have practical wisdom and without divisions that have practical wisdom is not going to function well. And to sort of offload that problem onto the question of centralization versus decentralization is like a category mistake. So I think that's what I'm seeing here. Matt and then Rudy, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think a lot of this loops into the part where he talks about System 3 being non-paradigmatic, because like it seems like Systems 2 and 3, and I guess even System 1 to an extent are like very much about having organizations and I guess organs, that really just don't fundamentally speak the same language. Like internally, your pancreas is regulated totally differently with totally different chemical signals, totally different types of cells than your liver. But, like they have to, they have to have a way to communicate and be, and mutually influence each other. And so, so I guess even System 1 to an extent in terms of like how exactly the systems from your, the signals from your pancreas are transduced, to your nervous system. And I guess also to, also happens to be hormones, but I mean, and in the same way, like you're coordinating, the copper mines with the port facilities. They speak different languages, and and figuring out how to have and I guess System 3 style in particular of mediate those totally like incommensurable internal paradigms. I think that's where the action's at. Like they don't speak the same language. What can they what common signposts like can they agree upon so that they can communicate at all?
Yeah, which very much sort of gets at the goals of analytic philosophy. What Wittgenstein is trying to get at in the Tractatus. So it's interesting in that way. Rudy, please go ahead.
I guess what I was reminded here is like, common sense will kind of depend on your class background. The higher up you go up the hierarchy, you'll inherently be more competitive and more willing to fuck others up. Just thinking of, of Dano's collective philosophy of workers as having a pure idea of getting things to work together. How inherently there's this contradiction, like to become a manager, you have to be an asshole, but the more of an asshole you are, the less cooperative you will become. So at some point, this just ends up having a like Sears moment, like they say in People's Republic of Walmart, that this guy just ideologically drove the company to the ground because he wanted to do some things. So there's like, you can never have a good company under this capitalism because to be the boss, you have to be a psychopath.
Yeah. The sort of, I think you put it very well, that there is a dynamic there that inherently works against the functioning of the system. And it's sort of that old thing about you want the king who doesn't want to rule. But then how does he become king? Right? But yeah, I think that is the kind of like psychological peculiarities that Beer was alluding to in that sort of elliptical sentence that he was saying there. Shane, go ahead.
One other small thing that kind of jumped out at me here that I found interesting was that the problem of part-whole or like individual group cohesion is not just phrased along that kind of one axis. It's now split across two different interfaces. There's a triangular relation now. That there's the relation, there's the ways that the System 1 units are synchronized by System 2 and the way that they're controlled by System 3. And they're not the same problem for Beer. They're facets, and again, this like multi-perspectival, multifaceted sort of approach to analyzing these kinds of things. It's an interesting complication of the usual sort of thing of like, well, you see, there's individuals, and then the group has to beat the shit out of them to make them comply or whatever, and it's a very one-dimensional sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely, because that would be the first error he discusses, right? Is like, oh, let's just abolish all autonomy and have central direction. Authoritarian central direction, and then it's like, oh well, that's like logically impossible that it would work. Yeah.
You think also maybe like I think maybe touching on what Matt was talking about earlier with the heterogeneous nature of these like System 1 components, that like we're talking about a framework for integrating different things in so that they can cooperate with each other. I mean, a lot of traditional organizations rely on homogeneity instead, right? That like the way they gain control is to flatten everything until it looks the same and behaves the same.
Yeah.
And that's the sheep cat. Yeah.
It's the old thing of seeing like a state.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
So that gives us some sort of a sense of what could, because I mean, you've that whole sort of doomer sort of thing of, well, how could we ever not see like a state or some such thing like that, right? Like, if all of modernity has this flattening, destructive kind of impact on lively autonomous systems, if it has tended to flatten them out into identical cogs, then what hope could there ever be for human flourishing in a advanced society? I think Beer is really indicating, no, I mean, you can integrate heterogeneous components and stuff if you fucking know what you're doing. Like, it's not a problem.
Yeah, it's a problem you have to grapple with dynamically, right? And again, that sort of gets at why Pickering says that, Beer has a non-modern ontology. He's not seeing like a state here.
Indeed.
Okay, well, that is going to do it for Chapter 11. We have finally finished this chapter, and that's going to do it for Chapter 12. We have finally finished Chapter 12, and we are moving on next time to Chapter 13, Environments of Decision, System 4. So we will be covering System 4 exclusively in Chapter 13. So I look forward to seeing you all for that next week.
Indeed. Okay. See y'all. Wonderful.
See y'all.
Bye, everyone.